You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week we're joined by Vanessa Cooksey, President and CEO of the Regional Arts Commission of St. Louis, and Chris Hansen, Executive Director of Kranzberg Arts Foundation. The two stopped by to discuss growth and investment in St. Louis's Grand Center Arts District. Stay with us. Today's podcast is brought to you by our super amazing and kind Patreon supporters. We appreciate you all keeping this show and Mondays at the Overhead Wire going. To join this merry band of Subway Crayonistas and City Smarties, go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $2 a month gets you some stickers and a handwritten note sent with a cool train station stamp. $10 a month gets you one of our transportation scars. And if you want to just give a single dollar a month, you'll be able to get the podcast with zero outside ads or podcast recommendations in Patreon. We'll leave information in the show notes about how to do it and how to get it into your podcatcher. We've also recently put up some bonus material and have weekly free posts from our newsletter intro, so check it out if you haven't already. And speaking of scarves, it's still winter, so get your heavyweight bus or bike scarves. You definitely need one for you, your friends, your colleagues, and for the anti-bus activists you just want to frustrate. If you want to get one of the bus or bike scarves or the lightweight bike scarf for hot climates, visit theoverheadwire.com or support us on Patreon. There are many other ways to support the show, including buying books from the bookshop site, either the books from the authors we interview or any book you like. bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. And find our Cars Are Cholesterol merch at bit.ly/carsarecholesterol. And for anything else, including the Town Planning and Practice audiobook that plays like a podcast, visit theoverheadwire.com. You can also get that podcast from Libby at your public library. And finally, definitely sign up for the now 20-year-old daily newsletter at theoverheadwire.com, established in 2006, and our over 100,000 item link archive tagged by topic and city. We'll leave a YouTube explainer video in the show notes for that one as well. Or you can just keep listening and enjoying the show. We appreciate that too. You can find us mostly on Blue Sky and Mastodon, sometimes on Threads, Instagram, Flickr, YouTube, Substack, and LinkedIn if you want to connect, usually at the Overhead Wire, but with Flickr, it's called Transit Nerds. We've got some great stuff coming up in our 13th year of the podcast, so keep on listening for announcements. But for now, just enjoy the show. Vanessa Cooksey and Chris Hansen, welcome to the Talking Headways podcast.
Thanks,
Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves? We'll start with Vanessa and we'll get to Chris.
Thank you, Jeff. My name is Vanessa Cooksey, and I have the pleasure of serving as the President and CEO of the Regional Arts Commission. We are the largest public funder of the arts in the St. Louis region.
And I'm Chris Hansen, the Executive Director of the Kranzberg Arts Foundation, and we are the infrastructure agent for the arts here in St. Louis. We provide the workspaces and studios, presenting spaces and infrastructure that over 40 arts organizations and dozens of creative industries rely on every day, right here in the heart of the Grand Center Arts District.
So what got you all interested in the arts and in cities and those types of things? Like, does it go back to when you were kids, or is it something that you stumbled upon when you're later on in life? How did you kind of mosey into this?
Well, I think my first interest in the arts really came through being a musician. So I grew up playing drums and percussion and really studying different cultures through music. So I got really enthralled in the musical process. And then I've spent most of my career kind of building the bridge between art and music. So for me, it was just kind of ingrained in early. The creative process is something that's so finite and magical, and to protect it and serve it and align it with the opportunities that ensure that it can build capacity and sustain has just been kind of a lifelong professional work since I've been in my early 20s.
And my interest in this work really goes back to childhood, high school in particular. Fell in love with filmmaking during high school and got a film degree, started my career at Cartoon Network in Atlanta, had an opportunity to work in the mayor's office during Shirley Franklin's administration, and then moved to St. Louis to start my career in corporate philanthropy. And so now being at RAC, I get the benefit of investing public dollars that add quality to life in St. Louis and supporting the artists and arts organizations that make St. Louis a great place to live and visit.
Can you tell me a little bit more about St. Louis and the scene there? I'm interested in the background and what's been happening.
Well, St. Louis benefits from a vibrant arts and culture community. We have over 600 arts and culture nonprofits here that the Regional Arts Commission invests in. And then we have thousands of working artists. And so I like to think of St. Louis as an arts town. We have great sports, but we also have amazing arts, and both those work together to make this a great place to live.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And it's really in St. Louis's DNA in our bones. We've birthed some of the giants across all arts disciplines, music and literary and visual arts and film. I mean, our local operas, one of the few doing original works going out to New York. We just have prolific theater scene. We're retaining our artists because we're putting the type of support and capacity around them where they live, where they work, where they present. So you're seeing more and more artists get famous and stay here. So we're right now in a moment in St. Louis where, we feel like we're one of the great arts and music and entertainment capitals in the world. And we know we are. We have it in our legacy. We have it in our infrastructure. And now the city and the region is starting to really identify that this is one of the things that makes us unique and sets us apart from other cities that we have to compete with for jobs and talent retention and attraction and tourism.
What's that process like in terms of, figuring out that you're a city of artists, you're a city of arts, and making that the thing that kind of pushes you forward?
This connection of where it starts and where it graduates, and this groundswell that we have in Grand Center, this collaborative ecosystem of fertile soil. And when you can put things in proximity and give it resources, but don't mess with it. Don't take what it does. Don't always put so many, be nimble with the way you support it. Be patient and just put it in proximity and things happen and grow. And I think, one of the things that really drives our position, our sector's position in the larger conversation in business and civic are the creatives. So, they're strong, they're solution-based, they're showing up in community, they're building these neighborhoods, and they're unabashedly kind of proud and vocal. And then it takes agencies like ours that can connect those voices to those rooms where those voices are less heard. And I think we work really hard at that, at really active listening, showing up where people are, not asking them to always come to us, and trying to build that bridge. And I think we have a really strong connection between the street level energy and where decisions are made now. And that is really affecting change.
Mm-hmm. And I think also from a public perspective, RAC has existed for 40 years. We've invested $115 million into a sector that generates almost $1 billion in economic activity and 12,000 jobs. But I like people to understand arts as civic infrastructure actually dates back in St. Louis to the early 1900s. You can see a through line throughout our history where our elected officials at the regional level have found mechanisms to ensure that public dollars invest in arts and culture resources here. So we've got a zoo museum district, which provides property tax dollars that supports our major institutions like the St. Louis Art Museum and the History Museum. And what that does is ensure affordability. It also creates a platform for and an environment for public-private partnership. And so I want to ensure that, people know arts have been important to St. Louis for centuries, right? And it will continue to be because of how we've organized our public support for the arts.
Yeah, it's historical. And what's interesting about that, too, is that cities around the United States have kind of risen and fallen over the last 100 to 150 years. But we had this, large upswell and rising populations and things like that. And then the fall to a certain extent, which was done in part by planners, but doing urban renewal and things like that. But I'm interested in that kind of wave that you've followed too, since early on, as you mentioned, Vanessa, you all have been investing in the arts for a long, long time. But you had that rise in the fall, and then you're coming back again and using that initial infrastructure as something to build on is really interesting to me.
Absolutely. And I definitely want Chris to share, because Grand Center has been an important part of our creative environment, creative infrastructure, but also our cultural history in St. Louis. And I think that, as with most things, how elected officials view the value of arts, and if they make it part of their agenda for not just economic development, but civic and cultural identity, and how we tell the story of our community, really, I think, is the through line for the rise and fall. But, Chris can speak specifically to Grand Center and how that has developed over time.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things about this area is that there's been so many, and when I say this area, the Grand Center Arts District here in Midtown St. Louis, there's just been generations of stakeholders and really important institutions and businesses and families over the years that have kind of led. And so it's not a singular effort. It's decades of investment from St. Louis University to the St. Louis Symphony to the Strauss family and the Fox Theater, Grand Center Inc., who's been our kind of neighborhood association that's done so much to continue to move the needle. Our organization, the Kranzberg Arts Foundation, over the last 10 years, really kind of carrying that momentum and starting a groundswell. Really, it used to be a place where art graduated and where the biggest institutions and the highest of art existed. But now it's building a bridge between where you can kind of discover a neighborhood without a ticket in your hand. There's more community benefits ingrained in ensuring artists can afford to be here. And there's more access than there's ever been. There's more diversity. And that is through intentional arts-based community development. And I think that approach to using real estate, which St. Louis is one of the few markets of our size with stock in an urban core so close to downtown with so much institutional strength and neighborhood strength around it, but you could still find blight and vacancy, and to be able to take those buildings through a call to action from community and align them through the needs assessments of artists and creative industries and nonprofits, and then just give them that space to do their work. That model of non-speculative, active listening, arts-based community development is really proven to be something that makes place, job creation, economic development, but rooting community interest and putting artists at a place where they can be the solution maker. And so it's a powerful combination when you have the stock, have a value-driven development, and a neighborhood that already wants it. And I think St. Louis is getting much better at fixing and breaking old systems and putting new mechanisms around broken systems that we've kind of defined and led in areas of redlining and kind of systemic segregation and racism and all the things that St. Louis has challenged in our fragmented personalities and geography. This style of development works in a city like this, and I think is a model at how you can do both hands. You can have community benefits, you can provide subsidy and be patient for those that need it, but you can also move the market and generate jobs and generate wealth.
Yeah, and I'd add one other note. Many of our arts organizations have their office as well as their, producing spaces in Grand Center. And one of the things that I find, unique in St. Louis is how focused on community outreach and accessibility that our arts organizations and artists, 3 in 5 of our arts organizations have programs for youth K-12, right? And so whether it's they're going to the schools or bringing children to their locations, having activities available for families, when so many of our arts organizations are intentional about outreach to young people, you start to develop patronage and you start to ensure that, people feel like this is for me. It's accessible. I enjoy it. I am learning. And of course, all of the health benefits that come with engaging in the arts. But I'm particularly impressed at how our outreach to young people has been consistent over the years. And so by the time they get to be adults, they're engaged in voting. They want their elected officials, and their civic engagement reflects that value.
16 projects over the last decade. You spearheaded a community development project that saved buildings that were slated for demolition. I'm wondering what the spark was for picking these specific places and focusing on them.
The foundation's work isn't limited to Grand Center, but we've really hyper-focused on it, right? We're a regional organization. We have initiatives broadly. We have affordable housing initiatives for artists and neighborhoods that call to action. But this was an area that had so much already going for it, but still had some gaps. It had missing teeth where there wasn't community improvement districts. There was still a lot of blight and vacancy. There was still a lot of disconnection. So the Grand Center Arts District was an obvious area for us to focus and centralize our energy. But, this started because one family believes so much that the arts in St. Louis, pound for pound, no one can beat us in the world, and that it's the soul of the city. And they wanted to impact it not just the bigs. They wanted to impact the smalls. They wanted to impact the small orgs and the 150 cap black box theaters for New Line Theater. And they just believed in it. They built their entire art collection around purchasing local art or from local dealers. So they just loved the city. They loved the creatives, and they wanted to lift it up and protect it. But we didn't really have a North Star, because when you're not speculating and you're building based on need and call to action and active listening, you don't know what the next year is going to bring. And I think for the first 10 years, every year brought a new call to action that we were able to take our model and say, we can find the right real estate. We can put the right mix use around it. We can support it and find a way to sustain it. And we have certain boxes we have to check to say, yes, that fits our model. But once we do that, we can go. And what we did is we first rooted the nonprofit and the artist. Then we built the commercial tenants around it to support it. Then we put the patron amenities around it that made it a 365 district. And it really just, one thing led to another. And it was that nimbleness, that institutional strength, nimbleness, but also that understanding that you had to make the economy around the artwork, right? It couldn't just be buy the building and subsidize everything, and then you bleed out all the time. We had to find the sustainable model. So that nimbleness is how we got here. But now to protect it and ensure it lives and lives and lives for generations and ensures that it's part of that sharp tool in the toolbox, we have to be more strategic. We have to build better partnerships with the public sector. We have to focus on the things that typically you would have to focus as a privately held foundation. We have to worry about the streets and the trash and the safety and the connectivity of the pedestrian experience. So it's been an amazing ride to do this work, but I tell you, it's really because of that individual creative. I think oftentimes we forget that all of this is only because the individual artist here is so strong that all these orgs can exist to support them, and all this infrastructure can exist to support them ultimately. And it's been a great honor in the family. It's blown their mind that we've been able to accomplish what we've been able to accomplish. And it wasn't because we said, we're going to go buy 20 buildings and do this. It was patient, it was nimble, and it was informed.
And I'd like to tag on to what Chris just described and why public-private partnerships are so important. Part of what makes Grand Center East work and the work that the Kranzberg Arts Foundation is doing is because of Chris. And I think that, his leadership is informed by the fact that he's an artist, and who knows better on how to bring people and things together to create something that didn't exist and to ensure that it can be of benefit to others than artists. Because whether it's the politics or assessing the economic value, I think Chris's lens is informed by him having been an artist, and he brings that. And ultimately, he knows and acts according to people as our greatest asset.
I appreciate that. And I will say that the artists every day still inform our process. Like I might have a CEO title and maybe it's a C-suite. And if you didn't know, you'd think we've been around for 100 years and we're this ginormous thing. But artists call me every day still and can pick up the phone and inform the way we move. And I think that's really important to never lose that connection to the creative process and the creative.
I find this interesting from the perspective of some of the guests that we've had on the show recently. This wonderful professor, Daniel Wartell-London, had a book about New York and its economic development over time and the two paths that the city could have gone on. One path is looking at people-powered kind of economic development and how, you can build through cities infrastructure that works for people, or you can build infrastructure to land and the land can build up through private developers and then you can tax them. It's an interesting dichotomy because what you all have done is the more people-powered perspective. And I find that really heartening, but also very prescriptive for other cities in that it's not just about the economic development of giving somebody some money and then sending them on their way, but actually building a community. And I think that we miss that a lot of times in cities around the country. And, we're focused so much on trying to get back on track to where maybe we were before, but there might be a different path forward that we weren't looking at.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we got to be inventive. We got to try new things. There's all these archaic tools that have been complicated and polarized communities, and there's a distrust of development. There's a distrust of aligning incentives for it. And so, you have to really roll up your sleeves and figure out new ways to do it. But more importantly, I think than anything, you have to make a place where people want to be. And I think a lot of times in traditional development, it's about stacking the sources and the incentives and all the greatest design and the best laid plan, and takes all this time and money, but you just still don't have that thing where someone wants to be. And I think that's the difference. When you put art to work, it creates place immediately. And if you're not using art, I think that's what a lot of cities do. They use art. If you protect it and invest in it and nurture it, it will pay dividends for you when you get behind that process. And yeah, getting people to all want to be in that same place at the same time is one of the hardest parts. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of traditional development fails at, or find it the hardest thing to do. And then it's about getting the fee, right? It's about finishing the development in the fee base and not actually ensuring that you've actually created something that people want to hold and be at.
Absolutely. And I think, for the Regional Arts Commission, our primary funding source is 4/15 of the hotel occupancy tax. And so we benefit from the visitors who come to St. Louis, that we get to then invest in lasting civic infrastructure. So it's a win for both the residents and visitors. And I think that when arts are seen as civic infrastructure, they power both community connection and cultural energy. And so when you go to a place, what do you talk about? The people that you experience there through different activities and arts. And so nobody wants to go to a place that's boring. Nobody wants to live in a place that's boring. And the arts creates these environments, like Chris said, the place where neighborhoods are walkable, and you've got music and galleries and restaurants, that really creates the kind of experience that people want more of. Either they stay in place, they continue to live where they live, or they routinely visit because of that cultural energy. And the arts does that better than most sectors.
I was going on a Google map looking at the district and just kind of impressed by the urban form of it. Just, the buildings are impressive, historic. There's a lot of walkability. It's easy to get around, it seems like. I'm curious what the work is to connect some of that urban fabric together, because it's obvious like not all the buildings are in the same street, but it does seem to be like a cohesive place.
Yeah, I appreciate you noticing that. I mean, a lot of areas are like one street, right? You have a strip, where this is, 4 blocks by many, many blocks, and it's surrounded by institutional strength. A historically Black college at Harris Stowe, St. Louis University, a veterans hospital, really important residential neighborhoods, City SC Soccer on the eastern side at Downtown West. And so we've got something that very few areas have, and the challenge for us is to connect that. And so a lot of our work at the foundation over the next coming years is to connect the dots. And we're doing that through public art, through a mural initiative called the Walls Off Washington, to not just make the streets more walkable, but to even make the alleyways feel walkable. To continue to work on public-private partnerships that invest in infrastructure, not handing developers money, but getting the streets and the traffic and the sidewalks and the lighting. And, we want to wake up in 10 years and be able to walk from the Fox Theater to City SC, which would only take you 15 minutes roughly to walk there, right? It doesn't take you that long, depending on how fast you walk. But we just want to be able to do that in a way where everyone feels safe, it's accessible, it's connected. And when you're walking, there's vibrancy, there's door pulls, and there's things that can entice you to enjoy it or view it, learn from it. And there's more people living here. So I think a big part of that is in a city like St. Louis, where there's a lot of fragmentation, there's multitude of taxing districts, community improvement districts, SPDs. We've really worked on setting that broader table across Midtown and into downtown to help build that bridge. And I think this is a moment where those public-private partnerships, really getting stakeholders that have invested their time and treasure, from faith communities, residents, small businesses, nonprofits, bigger institutions, and city government, to really start to work together to meet the moment in an area that is our greatest cultural asset. And we believe, and believe this through real data and being here, that Grand Center in Midtown is the most important and greatest cultural district in North America. And we're going to prove it over time by making it easier to enjoy it, because we still have too many flat surface lots. We still have harsh conditions. We still have lack of accessibility and connectivity. We don't need a lot more big things. We need small things now, lighter, cheaper, faster. We don't need another huge development. A couple hundred more residential units, a few more mom and pop restaurants, a little more retail, and most importantly, walkability and safety. And we've got Mecca.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And that's why we've been partners with the Kranzberg Arts Foundation for many years. And I like to think of the work that RAC does is public money for the public good. And art districts in particular succeed because they create a density of creativity and humanity, right? And so being able to come to a place where for just however many hours or time, you don't have to worry about all these things that divide and separate us. We have an amazing festival, Maddie. And when people are out together, this is St. Louis. It's not my particular neighborhood. Like, we're bringing all of the best of us to a place to experience something together. And so that density of creativity and humanity, especially for a time like this, I think is so important. And, KAF does it better than anybody.
You'll talk about the economic development impacts. You mentioned some numbers before, just under $900 million, almost $1 billion in local impact, tens of thousands of jobs, the impact there. I'm also curious, though, about the non-economic impacts. And you just mentioned that, Vanessa, a little bit. But, the economic driver for folks that is supported by folks who aren't necessarily, in it for the money, but they get the culture out of it, if that makes sense. So I'm curious what the value that's derived from the scene that isn't quite monetary, that you can't quite calculate, but you can feel.
Yeah, the social impact is something we are constantly working on measuring. And I think one indicator is seeing real diversity in every way you could imagine, using the word socioeconomic, identity, race, ethnicity, religious ideology. We really have that here. And it's because people feel comfortable. They feel safe. They can show up as who they are. And so I think ecosystems like this allow people to be themselves and feel comfortable being themselves around a lot of other people. So I think there's a lot of just wellness, mental wellness, and peace with that. The other thing is it's a big civic pride booster. And cities that focus on that civic pride quota are just healthier and wealthier. And there's real data behind that, right? There's real data that points to cities that love themselves do better. And so I think that's an important piece of this. It's just making people feel like, wow, man, St. Louis is cool and I like it here and it's fun. And I see people like this district and Music at the Intersection, Maddie, when you walk around, you're like, oh, this is what St. Louis looks like. It can be very fragmented. If you're in not the wrong place, but if you stay in certain areas, it might not look as rich and diverse. And so I do think that civic pride building and a sense of wellness and community is something that people long for. And when the arts do it right, they're part of health and wealth.
Absolutely. I'm actually looking for a recent stats page that we did. More art equals more health. And we've been able to connect a correlation between the presence of arts experiences, programming, infrastructure with a decrease in chronic disease like high blood pressure. So, when you talk about the social, there's also meaningful health benefits, how people feel and how long they live and their quality of life. I think it's the added quality of life experiences that matter and are reinforced by the presence of art.
Yeah, there's a real, as you mentioned, public health impact. And we talk about this in urban planning all the time, the ideas of, figuring out how to reduce loneliness and figure out how to get people together and build social capital and how that impacts people's health. And I think that's a really important point, just because when we measure economic impact, sometimes I think it's too much about the dollars and cents, but there's all these other impacts. And obviously a public health impact is a monetary impact. If you're spending less on hospitals, if you're spending less on people getting medical treatment for things. There's a wonderful book called Root Shock by Dr. Mindy Fullilove. And she talks about how basically if you remove people from a place, they disconnect from their friends and their loved ones, and it impacts them from a health perspective. And over time, there's this idea of the biomedical model versus the biopsychosocial model. And the biomedical model is just treating people when they get to the hospital. But the biopsychosocial model is treating the place and the people that live there and connecting them with each other. And I think this arts district is actually part of that biopsychosocial model, and it's improving people's lives in a larger sense than maybe just the monetary value that's generated.
And I'd like to also add that, what's also unique about this area, and you're so right about all that, it's not just an arts district, right? It's where people live. It's where people go to school. We have multiple high schools here, from Montessori to, our version of FAME, our art school. We have many different faith communities here that are like strong stakeholders. Just across from my office at Washington Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church, Martin Luther King spoke there twice, deeply tied to the civil rights movement. This is a place where people learn, the home of public media. So it's like you're saying, and we have hospitals all around us. We have counselors and therapists embedded in our ecosystem. And so this is a whole place. It's not just an arts district. It's a full connected neighborhood where everything in real life happens, but it's happening across, like you can go to the high-low at our literary cafe in the morning or afternoon of Blueprint, and you can see every walk of life, billionaire donors to struggling artists, to a neighbor up the street that's trying to find resources for reading, to nonprofit arts leaders, to St. Louis University and Harris Stowe students. So this mashup is, I think, people take that back to their neighborhoods. And we all like our little fiefdoms here. We have 91, I think, municipalities. But when we go back with that sense of what St. Louis really has to offer and what it looks like. And we spread that positivity and that energy, and that ripple effect pays dividends for the city. But you're so right. And I think Grand Center, to just identify with it as an arts district isn't enough. Its arts prowess is so strong, but what anchors it and makes it possible to have that armature are the things that are around it.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I'd add is that I find that our arts organizations, and people connected to them are more civically engaged. We do quite a bit of research, not just about the economic vitality and economic contributions of arts and culture, but also the social and the civic. And I believe it's 57% of our artists are registered voters, and the participation in local elections is twice as high for artists than it is for citizens. And so, as you can imagine, when we talk about engaging and being involved in owning the place that you live and having some sense of responsibility for that place, the presence of that is a lot higher when it comes to people who are connected to the arts, because they tend to want to be involved. And like I said, it's that ownership.
Have you seen any issues? I mean, here in San Francisco and other like coastal cities specifically, we see, arts grow and then fall, which is coupled with gentrification and displacement and other things that happen because of the value has been created by the artists and others, and then it's kind of extracted by others who come in later. But I'm curious if you've seen that in St. Louis, like the value that you're creating, it is not harmful, I don't want to say, but like you've seen some impacts outside of the area from the housing market or from displacement of folks or those types of things that we see sometimes in these coastal cities.
I can speak to that. And it's one of the things that we work really, really hard to not be a catalyst to disrupting markets. So in Grand Center, where you already have a commercial district, the importance here is to give place where art can start and give place where artists could afford and audiences can afford. But you want an economically viable district that generates taxes and jobs. But you want to ensure that those that can't afford have access, and that there's a nice amount of that assurance that these places are for those orgs and those individuals, but still the market can move. But in other areas, like our affordable housing initiatives with the St. Louis Art Place Initiative, it's about ensuring affordability in perpetuity, not to build a house, subsidize a house, and then let the house move with the market after 10 years, or to have the house appraised for below where the market's at, or have it appraised for much more. So you're really trying to stabilize and not interfere with the market, but you're trying to ensure that artists can always afford to live in a neighborhood that is in a gentrification mode, right? Where all this stuff's happening around it, where artists are starting to get squeezed, and a neighborhood says, we want to preserve our artist community and we need help with turning vacancy into vibrancy. And we want the artists that generationally lived here to always be able to afford to live here. And we want artists not just as renters, but as owners and stakeholders in a broader conversation. So we've built a wealth and equity path for low to moderate income artists to actually own a home without a land trust, without a ground lease, with a lure and a covenant that gives them a whole mortgage with a bank, 30-year fixed terms, and they build credit. They're showing up in a neighborhood that they're generationally connected to, and they can afford to live there. And when they want to leave, they get their principal back out. They have a relationship with the bank. They got their credit built, and the next artist can move in at that same AMI range. And so that house generationally stays affordable. And if that artist wants to stay there for the rest of their life, they can. But if they want to move, they don't get to sell it and take a big windfall. Another artist gets to afford to live there. And it's a very unique model. And I think that's one of the ways that we're trying to counter that effort, where an area like Cherokee, like it starts with grassroots arts and then development comes in, artists can't afford to be there and they move to another area, right? And then they do the same thing over and over. We're putting mechanisms in place that are ensuring that that doesn't have to be the case. And we're starting to see that other developers in the city and other partners are realizing, oh, that's a good model to ensure for that. But it's a constant issue. And I think St. Louis gets it right now more than it ever has. And I think we have examples that other cities can learn from. We went down to Austin at South by Southwest a few years ago and spoke to Austin folks about their challenges with that and showed them how we did things. And they were like, man, I wish someone would have thought about this with us. I think some would like to see that level of growth. And I think we all would. We'd love to see St. Louis have a period of just high growth without having to uproot and undermine these ecosystems and neighborhoods that are rooted with the people and businesses and organizations that made it the place that everybody wants to be at now. And I think we're better positioned to receive that wave and protect the creative and protect the art and that industry broadly and sector broadly.
Yeah. And St. Louis Art Place Initiative is another example of public-private partnership where the founding organizations were KAF, RAC, and Incarnate Word Foundation. And so, again, making sure that public-private partnerships are part of how we start to think about solving community problems like gentrification. And one of the things that RAC has been focused on for the last 30 years, and we've really accelerated it over the last 5 years, is capacity building for artists. We created a program called the Community Arts Training Institute, which really brings artists, civic business leaders, social workers together to think about how to integrate arts into solving community problems. And one of the mantra of that is with, not for. You don't come into a community and say, well, this is what you need. No, you engage the community in solving their community problems. And over the last 4 years, we've partnered with Mid-America Arts Alliance on a program called Artist Inc. Live that talks about the business of arts. And so we just don't subscribe to the starving artist mantra, right? There are things that we can do to help artists build their capacity and their knowledge about the business side so that they can make good decisions and invest their dollars in, assets versus being depleted and or exploited.
So the podcast, most of the time we talk about transportation, the largest topic. We talk about a lot of other things, but I'm curious how people get to the district and how they circulate a little bit, just because it's something that I'm always thinking about.
Well, we're definitely a city that loves our vehicles and loves our parking close to things. And we're trying to break that. There's some really amazing initiatives, the Brick Line initiative to really connect these areas downtown and north and south and have a walkable, bikeable path. So we're seeing these integrations come closer to the district. There is good public transportation throughout the district. We have a really great metro transit system. Lots of folks are still driving here, and those that live here can walk, but I would say we're still seeing most of the traffic come through vehicles, not public transit and not pedestrian bikes and walking, but that's some of the conditions we're trying to solve. MoDOT's got big plans right now. GRG and Brick Line are moving through the district and around the area And then that public infrastructure that makes that walk from the Fox Theater or the Contemporary Art Museum all the way to City SC feel vibrant and connected and safe. So, that's one of our challenges as a city, to get people more comfortable with parking and walking or taking public transport. But for the most part, it's vehicular.
You guys talk about this a lot, I'm sure, obviously, this topic. But I'm wondering if there's a question that you don't get asked that you wish you were.
I think for the Regional Arts Commission, more so than a question, just the recognition of how important public investment is in our arts and culture sector. And, I personally think that good government should be quiet, seamless, operating, doing what the residents need it to do. And so it's not that we need RAC to be known all over, but in times of challenge, where it's, budget shortfalls or politics, that the residents know, wow, I have a direct benefit from the Regional Arts Commission. It is the investment that they've made over the last 40 years that makes St. Louis a great place to live and visit. So we can find ways to cut here, there, and everywhere, but we want to make sure that, arts isn't a luxury for us. It's part of who we are. And we've been doing that, since the early 1900s. So just being able to connect the dots between what good government looks like and its impact on people's everyday experience.
I maybe kind of the same. It's not necessarily a question, but one is being asked the right question. I hope that we can continue to show our work in a way that allows other people a better understanding of how to benefit and how to make that ask in alignment. A lot of times folks just look at it like, give me money. We're supporting through a different way. So sometimes it's just like, you just wish they'd make the right ask so you could say yes because we like saying yes. And the other one is, what can I do to help? Like, mutualism, like a lot of times like, oh, you got it. Oh, you're going to carry it. It's like, no, like before I even ask, hey, what can I do to help? Sometimes, when you do the work and you're leading in work, people forget that, you need support in that work and you desire their input. So you just want people to keep showing up and informing. I guess that's the other thing, what maybe not ask, but like, if you get a seat at the table, show up every time, right? Like, stay engaged. I think more than ever, the right people are in the right rooms. Artists are informing our process as leaders like Vanessa and I try to connect their hopes and dreams with the opportunities and the bigger structures that feel daunting and these big black boxes that feel impossible to break through. I think we're demystifying it a little and bringing it back to the people and keeping our feet on the ground while we do it. And we don't get to leave these things to our children. Like, that's like the physicalness of these buildings. Like, I might have had a vision for things and know how to put it all together and manifest things into reality, but we're stewards and servants of gifts or public dollars in Vanessa's case, that we're just trying to make sure that, these things are generational, that our children get to and desire to stay in St. Louis and their children desire to stay in St. Louis, and that these are things that, are coveted and held and protected for generations.
And I would add just one other quick thing. Chris said stay engaged. And I think for the moment that we're in right now, stay encouraged and engage in the arts as a form of positive escape, as a reminder of our humanity and that, this too shall pass. And, staying encouraged and finding hope and joy in the midst of challenge is one of the things that arts does better than anything.
I love that. I need some positive in my life, and I've appreciated talking to you all because there's a lot of stuff going on, obviously, and lots of ways to be negative. But in the times that we're in, I think positivity is the way forward. Where can folks find out more about what you all are doing?
Well, the Regional Arts Commission is all over socials at St. Louis, STLOUIS Arts, and our website, racstl.org, racstl.org.
Yeah, and you can find us all over at Kranzberg Arts, and that's the socials and the web. Also, check out Maddie, Music at the Intersection, MATISTL.org, for a one-of-a-kind festival and conference that you can only find here in St. Louis. And it's a world-class event, and we hope people from all over the world will travel here, and they already do, but we want more and more. And hopefully folks out in San Francisco will think it's something that they would even be excited to come to. So you can find us all over the webs and socials and the LinkedIns and all that.
Yeah, everybody go from all over the U.S. And if you're overseas, which we know I have a bunch of overseas listeners, come to St. Louis as well. Vanessa and Chris, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We appreciate what you do, and stay encouraged and stay engaged.
And thanks for joining us. The Talking Headways podcast is a project of the Overhead Wire and appears first at Streetsblog USA. Thanks to our generous Patreon supporters who support this show and Mondays at the Overhead Wire. You can support the show as always by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. Sign up for our almost 20-year-old newsletter as well by visiting theoverheadwire.com, or check out the show notes for merch or other opportunities to connect. Follow along using your podcatcher of choice, but if you can't find it there, you can always find it at its original home at usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Headways. Hey everybody, we're past the main credits. Here we are at the end of the show. But I do want to give a shout out to some of our $10 a month or more Patreon supporters who've been helping the show along with your very, very generous support. If you've made it this far, you're probably a really big listener and reader. We really appreciate that. When I get new supporters, I'll update this section, so I hope that happens often. First names only, but big thanks to Andrew, Ben, Derek, Gabrielle, Glenn, Greg, James, Jeremy, Jim, Joseph, Catherine, Mao, Marcus, Matthew, Mike, Nicholas, Abraham, Oliver, Steve, Abby, Ed, Matthew, and recently added Sylvia. Everybody who listens to this show and reads the newsletter is much, much appreciated. I just wanted to give our biggest supporters a little extra love and recognition. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.